In 1971, legendary film critic Gene Siskel walked out of a movie theater in just absolute disgust.
Right, which is saying something.
Yeah, I mean, he physically removed himself from the building before the credits even rolled,
Right.
and it was one of only 3 times he would ever do so in his entire illustrious career.
Only 3 times ever.
Exactly. And the offensive material that broke this cinematic titan, it was a live-action Disney comedy about a radioactive duck that poops solid gold.
It's just incredible.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so thrilled to have you with us as we explore a singular, completely baffling Wikipedia article detailing the 1971 film The $1 Million Duck.
It really remains one of the most fascinating paradoxes in Hollywood history, I think.
Yeah.
You have this film that provoked a visceral, just furious reaction from the era's top critics.
Yeah.
But simultaneously, it earned 2 Golden Globe nominations and served as the feature film debut for a highly respected stage actor.
And that is the central contradiction we are unraveling for you today. Like, how does a movie with a premise this inherently absurd manage to operate on so many different conflicting levels?
Right.
Because I have to admit, diving into this source material, I am filled with sheer delight. I mean, on the surface, it sounds like pure, unadulterated nonsense.
It does. But beneath that brightly colored, sort of slapstick exterior, there actually lies a surprisingly sharp, modern retelling of Aesop's classic fable, The Goose That Laid the Golden Eggs.
Oh, for sure.
The film takes that ancient morality tale and, wraps it tightly in 1970s economic panic, mid-century domestic struggles, and these incredibly complex family dynamics.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the absurdity, you and I need to look at the mechanical foundation of this plot.
The nuts and bolts of it, yeah.
Right, like how exactly does a standard waterfowl become a $1 million geopolitical asset?
Well, it all starts with a guy named Albert Dooley, played by Dean Jones.
Right.
Albert is a scientist, but he is fundamentally struggling. I mean, he can barely keep the lights on.
Yeah, and the movie goes out of its way to show us a flashback, right?
Yeah.
Establishing that Albert was his college valedictorian.
Exactly. He was the golden boy. He was supposed to change the world, and instead he's just drowning in bills.
It's so relatable, honestly.
It is. The film uses Albert to tap into a very specific brand of mid-century existential dread. The early 1970s brought this harsh economic reality to the American middle class.
Inflation was rising.
Exactly. Inflation was rising, the post-war boom was fracturing, and the promise that a good education guaranteed a prosperous life was, well, starting to look like a lie.
Wow, yeah.
So Albert is carrying the heavy, suffocating burden of unfulfilled potential. And that professional and financial stress bleeds directly into his home life. Specifically in his interactions with his wife, Katie, played by Sandy Duncan.
Which brings us to the most chaotic, inciting incident I think I've ever encountered.
Oh, it was brilliant.
So, in a desperate attempt to cut down their grocery budget, Katie tries to make this homemade applesauce recipe, but she botches it completely. Like, it is practically inedible.
Totally ruined.
Right. And she gives this terrible applesauce to Albert to take to his laboratory for lunch. And what happens next is described in the article as a humorous chain reaction, which honestly is putting it mildly.
It really is. The sequence of events is highly specific. Albert, disgusted by the applesauce, throws it into the laboratory trash can.
Naturally.
And then a test duck, which Albert happens to be running behavioral experiments on, wanders over, eats the ruined applesauce, and then waddles into a radiation lab where it is bombarded with radioactive rays.
I'm looking at this and immediately thinking about superhero origin stories.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, this is the exact same narrative architecture as a comic book. Peter Parker gets bitten by a radioactive spider and gains the proportional strength of an arachnid. Bruce Banner gets hit with gamma rays and turns into the Hulk.
Right.
Here, a duck eats bad applesauce, absorbs nuclear radiation, and gains the superpower of laying solid gold yolks. Except instead of fighting crime in the streets of Gotham, this duck's primary mission is fighting the Dooley family's budget deficit.
That's exactly it.
But, you have to help me with the internal logic here. Why applesauce? Why is a botched domestic recipe the necessary chemical catalyst for a nuclear reaction that produces precious metals?
What's fascinating here is how the film deliberately weaponizes the mundane. The applesauce isn't just a plot device. It's a physical manifestation of domestic failure and economic anxiety.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the film is taking the things that keep average people awake at night, worrying about the grocery bill, dealing with career stagnation, and using them as the literal springboard for a fantastical solution. It solves the crushing weight of capitalism with a glowing bird.
That is wild.
And the script adds this wonderful layer of oblivious absurdity to the domestic sphere. Albert decides to save the duck from being disposed of at the lab by bringing it home as a pet for his son, Jimmy.
Played by Lee Montgomery.
Right, and they named the duck Charlie, entirely ignoring the fact that the duck is quite clearly female since, it's laying eggs.
Just a perfect little cherry of nonsense on top. So, the Dooley family now has a duck named Charlie who lays eggs with solid gold yolks. But if I'm Albert, I'm waiting by that duck's nest every single morning, expecting biology to take its course.
You'd think so.
But instead, the movie throws a bizarre wrench into the mechanics of how this gold is actually produced.
Yeah, Charlie's biology has been fundamentally altered, removing her from standard avian reproduction cycles.
Right.
She operates on a highly specific Pavlovian trigger.
Yeah.
She only lays a golden egg in direct response to a singular stimulus, the barking of a dog.
You cannot write this stuff. A duck that poops gold, but only when a dog barks at it.
It's pure absurdity.
So think about what you would do in this situation. Albert, Katie, their son Jimmy, and Albert's friend Fred, who was played by Tony Roberts in his motion picture debut, by the way, they start hoarding these golden yolks.
Of course.
They start secretly selling them off to solve their financial woes. But you can't just suddenly offload large amounts of untraceable raw gold without people noticing. Which introduces us to their neighbor, Mr. Hooper, played by Joe Flynn.
And Hooper is the crucial bridge between the private domestic comedy and the public macroeconomic thriller.
Oh, I like how you put that.
He isn't just a nosy suburban neighbor, he's actually a bureaucrat working for the United States Treasury Department.
Such a convenient coincidence.
Right. But his introduction is pure physical slapstick. He spends his time haphazardly spying on the Dooleys, climbing trees to peer into their windows. At one point, his wife Eunice yells at him to leave the neighbors alone, which startles him so severely he falls completely out of the tree.
But the snooping actually pays off, because Hooper manages to witness an egg-laying celebration firsthand.
He does.
He sees Albert and Fred cheering over a freshly laid, solid gold yolk. And this is where the movie violently shifts gears. Hooper runs straight to his boss at the Treasury Department, a man named Rutledge, played by James Gregory.
And panic ensues.
Exactly. Hooper starts screaming about the massive economic upheaval that an easy supply of gold would cause.
Well, and Rutledge is initially skeptical, but Hooper's panic forces the narrative to scale up dramatically. The rumor mill begins to turn within the government.
We watch this whole sequence of panicked nationwide phone calls among high-level politicians.
The anxiety travels all the way up the chain of command, culminating in a phone call directly from President Richard Nixon, who orders the Treasury Department to capture the duck.
No, wait a minute. Let me push back on the critical consensus that this movie is just a brainless kid's romp.
Okay, go ahead.
Isn't this actually a brilliant piece of macroeconomic commentary? You have this brightly colored comedy, but right underneath the surface, it's tackling the fragility of global markets.
It really is.
Because if you consider the historical context, this movie came out in 1971. That is the exact same year President Nixon famously enacted the Nixon shock, taking the United States off the gold standard. I mean, the movie is literally playing out the existential terror of a fiat currency system collapsing.
The parallels are deeply profound, whether intentional or accidental.
Right.
The film takes a universal childhood fantasy, the idea of a magical, limitless money machine, and rigorously applies adult bureaucratic logic to it.
Yes.
If a child finds a duck that lays gold, the child thinks of all the bicycles and toys they can buy. But if a U.S. Treasury bureaucrat finds out about it, their immediate thought is the total collapse of the global economy.
Because the supply is suddenly infinite.
Exactly. If a backyard fowl can infinitely replicate the precious metal that underpins global wealth, then gold becomes worthless. Hyperinflation sets in. The film forces the innocent fantasy of limitless wealth to violently collide with the harsh reality of macroeconomics.
And that macro-level governmental panic, the Treasury Department mobilizing, the president getting involved, forces a micro-level crisis right inside the Dooley family. Like, the external pressure exposes the internal cracks.
Yeah, as the wealth accumulates, Albert becomes entirely consumed by greed. The college valedictorian who felt like a failure suddenly has everything he ever wanted, and it completely corrupts his moral center.
It's tragic, honestly.
He stops caring for his son, Jimmy. His focus narrows entirely onto the wealth that Charlie the duck can provide, and this deeply alienates Jimmy, fracturing the very family unit that the money was originally supposed to save.
Imagine being Jimmy in this situation. The pet you love has turned your father into a monster. So when the Treasury Department officials, led by Mr. Hooper, finally descend on the Dooley house to confiscate the duck, Jimmy takes action.
He climbs out of an upstairs window with Charlie.
And in a twist that is so perfectly 1970s, he manages to hitch a ride with a couple of teenage boys in their hot rod, leading the federal government on a high-speed chase.
It's amazing. And the chase culminates in this surprisingly suspenseful, high-altitude climax that serves as a brilliant physical metaphor for the family's emotional state.
Right, the ladder scene.
Yeah. Jimmy ends up stranded on a ladder that is precariously bridging a massive gap between two parking garages. He is trapped high in the air, terrified, clutching the duck, while the authorities and his father close in.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Albert rushes to the edge of the garage and reaches out to his son, begging Jimmy to grab his hand before the ladder gives way.
But Jimmy refuses.
He does. He looks at his dad and tells him to go away. Jimmy genuinely believes that his father doesn't care if he falls. He thinks Albert only wants to secure Charlie so he can keep getting rich.
It is a stark, devastating representation of their emotional distance. The wealth has literally placed them over a chasm.
Wow.
But as the ladder begins to snap, Jimmy's primal fear takes over. In the final, terrifying moment, right before the ladder completely falls away, Albert reaches out and pulls his son to safety.
Leaving the duck behind.
Right. Albert saves Jimmy, leaving the duck behind, realizing in that split second that his child is vastly more important than the gold.
But the moment their feet hit the concrete, the reality of the adult world comes crashing back down. Albert is immediately arrested by the authorities for owning raw gold as a private citizen.
Which leads us to the courtroom scene.
Yes, which operates exactly like a failed magic trick reveal. You have to picture how absurd this looks to a casual observer in that courtroom.
Well, the government has the burden of proof. They have to demonstrate to a judge that this specific, entirely ordinary-looking duck is a threat to the United States economy.
Exactly. So Mr. Hooper, a high-ranking Treasury official, stands up in a court of law in front of a judge, looks at a duck, and starts aggressively barking like a dog.
And nothing happens.
Nothing happens. He looks like a lunatic. Then Albert tries. Albert barks at the duck. The Pavlovian trigger finally works. The duck lays an egg. The courtroom holds its breath. The judge takes the egg, cracks it into a glass. And it's just a perfectly ordinary, runny, yellow egg yolk.
The magic is gone.
The magic is completely gone.
The text notes that the effects of the radiation had simply worn off over time. But the narrative symbolism is crucial. The fading of the radiation perfectly mirrors the fading of Albert's greed.
Oh, that's a great point.
Yet, breaking the biological mutation is akin to breaking a fever. The curse of the limitless wealth lifts at the exact moment the family unit is emotionally and morally restored.
Because there's no longer any proof of the golden eggs, the judge is forced to dismiss all the charges.
Right.
Albert turns to his family and admits that while the money was nice, at least they get to keep Charlie as a regular pet. The status quo is restored.
Yeah.
But that courtroom scene represents the ultimate rejection of the duck's value within the movie's universe. And ironically, transitioning to the real world, film critics were doing the exact same thing to the movie itself.
The history of how this movie was received is just as polarized as the plot itself. Even the production details are a study in absurdity. The Walt Disney Studio actually held massive open auditions for the role of the duck.
Just picture being a casting director on that particular Tuesday. You're bringing in hundreds of ducks, looking for that elusive star quality.
The lead role was ultimately won by a duck named Webfoot Waddle. And we even know the names of the runners-up, who were kept on set as understudies. Two ducks named Jennifer and Carlos.
Webfoot Waddle, Jennifer, and Carlos. The holy trinity of 1970s avian cinema.
Truly.
Now, from a strictly financial perspective, the movie was a hit. It pulled in $5.1 million in rentals in North America, which was a very solid return in 1971.
Yeah, it was profitable.
And Tony Roberts got genuinely solid reviews for his feature film debut, and the Hollywood Foreign Press Association clearly saw something of value here because both Sandy Duncan and Dean Jones received Golden Globe nominations for their comedic acting.
But while the Golden Globes were handing out accolades, the major film critics of the era were sharpening their knives.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. The legendary Roger Ebert reviewed The $1 Million Duck and did not hold back. He called it, quote, one of the most profoundly stupid movies I've ever seen.
Ouch. And his partner, Gene Siskel, had an even more visceral reaction. As we mentioned at the top of the show, Siskel actually walked out of the theater.
Unbelievable.
To put that into perspective for you, Siskel reviewed thousands upon thousands of movies during his decades-long career. He only walked out of 3 films. Ever.
That is just wild.
Right. One was the grim 1980s slasher film Maniac. One was the 1996 Chris Farley comedy Black Sheep. And the third was The $1 Million Duck. That is elite, baffling company.
And the criticism hasn't softened over the decades either.
Really?
Yeah, modern critics have pointed out elements that aged terribly. Scott Weinberg from DVD Talk blasted the film's depiction of Sandy Duncan's character, Katie. He noted that she is asked to play a housewife who is, in his words, easily as stupid as a stone.
Oh, wow.
He highlighted that her total incompetence is played entirely for laughs, calling it one of the studio's worst live-action family comedies. To this day, the aggregate scores remain incredibly low, a 17% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and a Metacritic score of 45 out of 100.
So, what does this all mean? Like, how do you reconcile these two massive extremes? On one hand, you have a movie that Gene Siskel fundamentally refused to finish sitting through. On the other hand, the Golden Globes looked at that exact same piece of media and said, yes, this is award-worthy acting.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at the mechanics of film criticism in 1971. This was the peak of the new Hollywood movement.
Oh, right.
Critics like Siskel and Ebert were championing gritty, realistic, director-driven masterpieces films, exploring moral ambiguity and raw human emotion.
Right.
So when they were presented with a Disney formula film about a radioactive duck, they evaluated against those highbrow standards of narrative structure and thematic depth where it is inevitably going to fail.
That makes total sense.
But the Golden Globes recognized something entirely different. They recognized the sheer athletic effort required by the actors.
Dean Jones and Sandy Duncan were doing incredibly heavy lifting. They had to take a script featuring a nonsensical premise, outdated domestic tropes, and a duck named Webfoot Waddle, and somehow ground it with enough energy and comedic timing to keep paying audiences in their seats for 92 minutes.
Exactly. The award nominations were an acknowledgement of the performances making an impossible script workable. The actors brought a desperate humanity to a cartoonish reality, even if the critics despised the premise itself.
It's like winning an award for successfully bailing water out of a sinking ship. I mean, you have to respect the craft of an actor who can genuinely sell a scene where a U.S. Treasury agent falls out of a tree while spying on a duck.
They really do.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to bring this back to you listening right now. Think about Albert Dooley's journey. Think about the tension between what we desperately want and what we actually need.
It's a universal struggle.
It is. What would you do if you suddenly stumbled upon an unlimited resource in your own backyard? If your crushing budget anxieties vanished overnight, would you be able to keep your moral compass straight? Or would you end up completely alienated from your family, standing in a crowded courtroom, desperately barking at a duck?
It's a ridiculous image, but it asks a profound question about the corrupting nature of wealth.
And if nothing else, I hope this exploration proves that there is a rich, complex, and fascinating history hiding behind even the most critically panned, bizarre pieces of pop culture.
It absolutely proves that. And I want to leave you with one final detail to ponder, drawing right from the very end of the film.
Oh, what's that?
Remember the judge's final remark to young Jimmy after the duck lays a normal egg and the crisis is averted? The judge leans over the bench and says, if that duck ever lays another golden egg, bury it quick.
No.
I want you to consider the weight of that impulse. When society encounters an inexplicable anomaly, something that completely disrupts our economic systems or challenges our accepted reality, why is our immediate institutional instinct so often to bury it rather than try to understand it?
A phenomenal question to leave on. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll catch you next time.